Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 629 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's show, we're going to be speaking with Tiffany, who is the mother and daughter of a type 1. Tiffany herself does not have type 1 diabetes, but she's here to share the story of the people around her who do. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should keep... Whoa. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox... I'll go again. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Wow, 3 times. That doesn't usually happen. If you are a U.S. citizen who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver of somebody who has type 1 diabetes, please go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Join the registry, fill out the survey, support type 1 diabetes research while you're supporting the podcast. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Record your voice here for a second. Just give me any testing words. It's fine.
Okay, I'm Tiffany.
Excellent.
And I'm nervous. This morning I was like, why did I do this? I just like listening.
Well, guess what? This is recording fine, so we're just going to keep going, and we're going to make that your introduction.
Okay.
So, Tiffany, let's start with, you're nervous?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know. I think every episode is great, and yet I'm like, why am I on? I don't know why I did this.
You think you're going to be the one that messes it up?
No,
Okay.
but I did coming into it think, do I just be totally honest and then I can tell everyone, oh, I was on this, listen to it? Or should I just be, or, I didn't know if I should try to be a little more
let me
nice
ask,
about.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. You're saying if you're
Okay.
completely honest, there are people you're not going to be able to share this with.
Yes.
Are those people physicians?
Oh, no,
Oh.
more school nurse or
That kind of thing.
I don't know, family members or.
Gotcha. Well, we'll see where it goes, and then you can decide afterwards who to tell and who not
Okay.
to tell.
Okay.
Right now, only you and I know. So,
Okay.
although I have to admit, I just recorded an episode with a person who works in the endocrinology department of a fairly large hospital, and we got to the end of it, and the person said, I heard this long, dullness in their voice. And I said, are you thinking we shouldn't put this up? And they said, yes, I am starting to think that. And I said, I'm also thinking that. I think maybe you would lose your job.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I want my job, but
No, but it was just
I don't want to offend anyone.
Well, yeah, this was different than that. This was like, oh, that's how you feel about some of those people? It was just it's an interesting look into how somebody inside of the system might see parts of the system that are claiming to do things for you. So anyway, That's not this. Tiffany, you are how old?
So I'm 37.
Okay. And
I'm
sorry, you don't have type 1, right?
No.
Okay.
So my connection to type 1 is that my dad was a type 1 and my daughter is type 1. So I'm that skips a generation.
Yeah.
I know that's not science, but it's interesting that that's something I was told growing up. Oh, don't worry. It skips a generation.
You think that's just something somebody told you so that you wouldn't worry about it?
Yes. Because as a kid growing up, my dad was an uncontrolled diabetic. So I was afraid to get type 1 growing up. And then I think people thought, telling me, don't worry, it skips a generation.
Yeah. There's a special thing that happens. You can't get it. Don't worry about it.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
When would that have been? The late 70s, early 80s?
So my dad was diagnosed at age 10 in about mid 60s. And so I grew up in the 80s and 90s.
With that.
Yes, hearing the skips a generation theory.
Don't worry. It skips a generation.
It'll happen to your kids. And so, yeah, growing up, I did think like, well, I don't want to have kids because they're going to have diabetes. I want to adopt.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's what I think. I don't know that's Arden talks about adopting. So I'm not sure still where that comes from. But it might be part of that. I have no idea. We'll see. She's pretty young still. Okay. So you called your dad uncontrolled. I mean, in fairness to him, he was probably, even if he was doing everything they told him to do in the 60s and 70s, he was probably not doing well as far as his health goes, but it wouldn't mean that he wasn't doing what they were asking him to do. Do you have a feeling for whether he was following the rules of the time or if he was even just ignoring that?
So it's interesting because Dad passed away when I was 13. So only lived to age 41. And so I only have a kid's view, a kid's memory of my dad. Asking my mom, my aunt. He was diagnosed at age 10 in a time where they, I guess, told you, you're going to have a very short life. And his mom treated him as if he were sickly and, oh, poor Richard. That was my dad's name. And so he really lived like he was only going to live for 10 years. So I do have a new respect that did not have the tools to speak up for us either.
You're breaking up, Tiffany. I'm sorry. You said he didn't. You have respect for the fact that he didn't have the tools.
Yes.
Okay.
He didn't have the tools. So I have a much better understanding of how hard that would have been. And, he was testing his urine instead of blood. But he definitely, it was in his mind that he wasn't going to live long. So just have fun. Okay. So it was a little reckless.
Yeah. So once he thought fait accompli, then he was just like balls to the wall. I'm going for it. And I'm not going to do I'm probably not doing most of these things I'm supposed to do most days. And I'll just go as fast and hard as I can until this.
Exactly.
He probably woke up in his 30s and was like, why am I still here?
Possibly.
Yeah. He's like, oh, I guess I should have a kid. And then here you are.
Yes. So my sister and my parents divorced when I was little. So we would go to his house on weekends. And yeah, to me, it seems crazy that my mom let us.
Was he passing out and things like that? Or what was his, what was it like being around him? Do you remember?
I do have memories of growing up where we would call 911 every so often. I remember some car accidents from when he was low. Just really crazy things that I always kind of not laughed off, like, wow, that was crazy.
Yeah.
And then when my daughter was diagnosed, I realized probably how traumatic those things were. Mm-hmm. It always was like, oh, what a crazy childhood. And then when my daughter was diagnosed a year and a half ago, I think it all kind of flooded in as like, that's not so funny.
Right.
That's,
He was holding on by a thread the whole time.
Yeah. So he died of diabetes complications. So like strokes, he had just started dialysis.
Yeah, he got to it pretty quickly, huh?
Yes. And it's from sustained highs. Right. So when my daughter was diagnosed, I was so afraid of high blood sugars instead of the lows. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your perspective's different.
That felt very scary early on when we didn't know how to control it, and we're pricking our finger and it's 300. I didn't have the knowledge of like how to get it down and get it stable.
Yeah. But instead of just thinking, I know this isn't healthy, you were thinking, this is what killed my father.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That was definitely my initial thoughts. Right. So I had a really hard time with her diagnosis.
Yeah, you didn't think she would find calling 911 to be a fond childhood memory, huh?
No.
Yeah. Ooh, wow. That's really kind of, I'm lost for my words, but that must have been overwhelming for you, I'm imagining.
Yes. So I definitely got a therapist when my daughter was diagnosed. Her diagnosis story is a little, similar in a lot of ways to everyone else, but I've always known the signs. So then when she was starting to drink a little more water, we blamed it on she got a new water bottle that she loves. And she started peeing a little more. But I was confused because online I was reading fruity smelling breath, but she wasn't in DKA. So I was a little thrown off because I was like, well, she doesn't have that. She's not vomiting. She's not lethargic. And, I was reading the DKA symptoms, but it was so early on. I brought her to the pediatrician and I started crying and I was like, my dad was type 1. I think she has type 1. She has this, and this symptoms. And the pediatrician thought I was nuts and just was like, okay, so she's tired after a school day. She's, I don't know, brushed it off, took a urine sample, just thinking that it was a UTI and sent us home. And I went home to my husband and I was like, wow, I need therapy. I have convinced myself she has type 1 diabetes and she doesn't. Oh. And then the doctor called us back about 24 hours later and said, so there's glucose in her urine. And I was like, what does that mean? And she said, she probably has type 1 diabetes. And I said, could it be anything else? And she said, maybe a rare kidney disorder, but probably type 1.
Yeah. Which one of these bad things do you want to wish for right now? Exactly. A rare kidney disorder or type 1? Did you stayed with the idea of I'm going to therapy no matter what?
Yes.
Yeah. It didn't make you go, aha, I knew it.
Well, and I really believed I had caused it. I know it sounds nuts now, but I don't know. Have you heard of the book, The Secret? The law of attraction?
No, you're beyond me on that one. What is that?
Oh,
are you going to tell me some hippie thing?
Just,
this is going to be a hippie thing, isn't it, Tiffany? Go ahead, tell me.
Yes. It just I think I was in college when the book, The Secret, and there's a movie, and it's whatever you think about, you will bring into your life. Oh. And so I really thought, oh no, I've been thinking about type 1 and my kid type 1, that I brought it on her, which is bonkers. That's not how science works. But I really believe that I had caused it.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. Yeah, no, I've wished for a number of things in my life and thought very hard on them, and none of them have happened. So I'm going to go that I don't think that works. But I understand the feeling of I've surrounded us with this, like this specter constantly, right? Now here it is. Although autoimmune is, does get passed down through generations. So that's probably your better example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking my genetics caused it.
You're like, I put the bad juju on this whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, oh, wow. Yes. But that aside, the feeling is I did this. Yes. Yeah.
And I felt so guilty. I don't know if I even said it to my husband because I felt so guilty. I really believed it. I couldn't say to him, I caused this. I've been thinking about this and I caused this.
Where do you land on that now?
That's crazy.
Okay.
Because, I'm sure we'll get to this later. A year after her type 1 diagnosis, she was diagnosed with a second autoimmune disease that I've never even heard of. Mm-hmm. So clearly I did not bring that into existence because I've never even heard of juvenile dermatomyositis. Before she was diagnosed with it.
I was wondering how we were going to pronounce that. Well, yeah, we will get to that. That's super interesting as well. I don't want to stay here too much longer, but any other things in your life that are you find yourself on the boardwalk and you go get your palm read or something like that? Is that your vibe, or did this book
not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. I think it was just the power of positive thinking. I liked that book in college and thought, if you think success into your life, it will come.
I think
but no.
Well, by the way, not to get too far off track, but you can talk yourself into doing something. There's no doubt in that. I don't know that you can talk yourself into getting diabetes, but I mean, you could say, I'm going to get up every day. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to, move towards a goal.
Yes.
Those things you can hype yourself up for. And
I think that's the value in what
of that
they
idea.
were saying.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah. Listen, there are days when I walk in this room and I'm like, oh, I can't do this again. I can't edit another podcast. Like, I already recorded it. Like, someone else do it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to, but then I sit down and I start listening and I'm like, oh, I remember how good this conversation was. I want to get it out to people, and I get a little excited, and and you can move yourself in directions like that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Okay, so your father grew up with type 1 at a time well before any kind of meaningful understanding. It seems like he leaned into the idea of I'm going to live fast and leave a good looking corpse. And then it happened for him. You have this happen. First, you see a divorce, and then you see living like that, but not for particularly long. I mean, he passes when you're fairly young. What's the impact of his passing on you?
I mean, it was definitely, sad and traumatic. I was 13. He was, my sister was 15. I feel like she took it much harder because this is going to be terrible, but his side of the family, I think, made comments to my sister saying like, oh, you didn't look after your dad, or kind of made her feel responsible for his health. And I never took that on, as I've always had the view of, I was a child. He's an adult. We were not responsible for his health. We were at his house. We woke up in the morning and found him unconscious.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Called 911 thinking, this was going to be just a routine wake dad up thing. But I don't really know what happened in the end, but I think it was like DKA leading to a coma, and was in a coma for 2 weeks, but then had a do not resuscitate. So then passed, I think 2 weeks later in the hospital. I never took it on as my responsibility, but I feel like my sister did.
I have to tell you, when you said that just now, that extended family said you didn't take good care of him, I thought the same thing that I have found myself thinking so many times while recording this show. Like, what is wrong with some people? Like, really, like, pull yourselves together a little bit. You go up to a child and blame them for the death of a man who's, born with the disease in a time when nobody knew how to manage it well. Like, this is probably your fault that your dad said, oh, well, great. Like, that won't stick to her. She's probably walking around thinking about that right now. Like, that's really terrible. Oh, people, please try a little harder than that,
To get a little deeper into that family, my dad's brother was also diagnosed with type 1.
Did your sister kill him too? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Sorry. All right.
He did pass this year.
Well, where's your sister? Let's get her and let her know what she did wrong. Like, I mean, how did he pass? Please tell me he was hit by a car or something.
No, it was actually COVID.
Oh, geez. I was just hoping it wasn't diabetes. I didn't. Oh, he got COVID?
Well, okay. So my dad was diagnosed at age 10. Mm-hmm. His older brother was diagnosed at age 30, but thinks that he actually started seeing symptoms in his mid-20s and was kind of in denial and didn't want to face it and just enjoyed the weight loss.
Gotcha.
Part of it. And it really ravaged his body going for years before seeking treatment.
Oh.
So he had a kidney pancreas transplant.
Oh.
About the year 2000.
So
and
he was
lived for 20 more years.
He was on immunosuppressing drugs when COVID came.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Damn.
So, I mean, he was already in very poor health, but COVID was surprisingly the thing that actually got him.
His poor health was from damage from the diabetes prior to the transplant?
That's yes.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. So, I mean, like every complication you can think of, diabetes related, from having high blood sugars too. Once he was diagnosed, it wasn't like great care either.
Yeah. So he probably,
it was probably like 1980.
Yeah, that's still too early. And he probably, I'm assuming he felt the same way your brother did because he saw it happen, or your father did because he saw it happen to his brother. And then it probably felt pretty hopeless. And then he just got back on that ride along with him. That's terrible.
I think he tried to, I do think he had a different, he had 4 kids, great marriage.
Oh, wow.
I think he was in a different situation, but yeah, I was talking to my aunt and she was saying, oh, his range was 280 to 3 something that the doctors wanted to keep him in because before you knew it, he would drop to 12. So he was constantly in ER, couldn't feel his legs from his knees down. And
I think that if you're listening and you've ever found yourself like feeling ill about the technology that exists today, you should imagine a world where somebody tells you to keep your blood sugar over 280 because you might drop to 12.
Yes.
Yeah. Ugh.
So I feel like I can talk about it without thinking this is going to be my daughter's story. But, I can separate them in my head. Like, yes, she has type 1, but she will have a very different experience than my dad and uncle in a lot of ways.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a big difference between having a baby in 1810 and having a baby now.
Yes.
We figured a lot of stuff out and there's a lot more technology and we know how to do things. And, there's a lot of reasons why things aren't going to go the same way, leaving for the idea that somebody is going to just have spectacularly bad luck. And it's not going to be everyone's lot the way it might have been more significantly everyone's lot in the past. A lot of people who were diagnosed around the time of your father and even his brother are going to end up in similar boats by the time, things are done. And some people get lucky or some people really figure it out, or they eat a different way, which makes a big difference. But for the most part, that was the way they talked about it. That's the way doctors talked about it, and they followed along.
Yes.
Geez, really crazy. Yeah. I don't think that our children and people diagnosed now are going to have, I don't think they're on the same path, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's interesting is when my daughter was diagnosed, diabetes was really so out of my life, or it felt like that. My uncle lived in another state. My dad had been gone for 23 years. Diabetes felt very out of our life. I didn't know anything about carbs and, counting carbs or how people manage. I thought insulin pumps did everything for you.
Right.
I really didn't know about it. When my daughter was diagnosed and they were asking family history, I said, oh, well, my dad's brother. And then I said, my father-in-law is type 2, my husband's father. Mm-hmm. But he's type 1, and I didn't even know it because he was diagnosed at age 60 and was one of those classic, misdiagnosed as type 2 and was on metformin for years.
Oh, how long?
And wears a pump.
How long had your father-in-law had diabetes that you didn't know he was type 1?
I guess I don't really know. I think he's had it for 20 years now.
Oh, wow. Now, because he didn't tell you or because are you not close?
He never talked about it.
Huh.
We're close, but he was always, until my daughter's diagnosis, he just pulled out his meter and pump and put in his carbs. And it was just something we didn't even talk about or ask much about.
Your father, I'm sorry, your father's diagnosed at 10. Your husband's father's diagnosed at 60.
It's at 60. So yes, our kids are, I don't want to say doomed, but they have it from both sides of the family.
Yeah, I'm assuming the odds change.
Exactly.
You had no idea. Isn't that interesting?
I told the doctors type 2. Because I didn't know you could get diabetes at age 60. And it be type 1.
So now in hindsight,
I know.
Anyone else on your husband's side have type 1?
No other endocrine things that we know of. But my side, my sister has Hashimoto's. My mom has lupus. My dad had type 1. So apparently I'm the only one that doesn't have something.
Oh, I don't know about that. You might want to knock on wood or something.
I agree. Yeah. I feel like something's coming because there's no way I got off.
Wow. Wow. Oh, geez. This is like a firestorm of autoimmune coming from every side and angle. Are you guys all from the same kind of background? Like, are you all like Irish or English or
So I know my mom's side is Norwegian.
Scandinavian. Go ahead.
I think my dad's side is Irish. I'm only guessing because my grandma's name is Patricia. Very scientific.
That was great.
My husband's side, I think, is German. I don't know.
I'm just putting together anecdotal thoughts from years of making this podcast. That's all.
Yes, I agree. It's always like Scandinavian
stuff like Denmark. That. Yeah, like when you hear somebody who's like, outside of those like spaces, like, wow, it really got you. Like that's, it's festering in other places, but so interesting. Like I wish I would have known when I was younger. I would have asked my wife first where she was from.
Well, yeah, I know. And we should have met each other and been like, what's the family medical history? Type 1, we got to go.
You know what? We'll just keep dating. We'll get a dog or something. It'll be nice. Wow. But I mean, listen, we're joking around. Would you change your family? Would you
of course not. Of course not.
Right. You wouldn't give your kids away so that your daughter doesn't have type 1, would you?
No.
If you would you ever say it here?
No.
No, I don't think so. You're sitting over there thinking, oh, Scott, I'd give this back in a heartbeat. I just can't tell you.
And really the podcast, I think, has really given me a better outlook on things because there's so many people that have multiple children with type 1 that in the Facebook group and people that have come on that I feel like I have a better mindset for. So I have an 8-year-old who's my type 1 and her little sister is 6. And is not type 1, but I feel like I'm bracing myself, not living in fear, but just, we know how to deal with it, kind of looking at it that way.
Right.
If she were to be diagnosed.
Well, as they're growing up, point them towards boys who were born in certain parts of the world where nobody has type 1 diabetes. Maybe that'll be helpful. You don't like him. Look over here. Would that be a weird thing to do? Okay, so your daughter's diagnosed at how old?
So she was 6 in first grade.
Wow.
And we definitely, I don't want to say timed it right because COVID's terrible, but she was diagnosed February 2020. And then kind of the world shut down a month later. And I'm a 4th grade teacher, so I was able to be home when school closed. And it really helped us figure out diabetes because our life slowed down when school shut down. So she was in school for 5 weeks, newly diagnosed, and we didn't have a Dexcom until 3 months later. But during that time, that's when I found the podcast maybe a month in to diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
A friend had recommended Dr. Bernstein's book. Oh, my friend has a type 1 and they follow Dr. Bernstein. So I bought the book, read it within 2 weeks of diagnosis and I didn't really have panic attacks, but I could not sleep from reading that book because then I felt like every carb I gave her was killing her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really glad I found the podcast where no, there's a way to eat carbs and dose for it to get good outcomes.
I think this is great, amazing insight into something that happens to people at the beginning of a diagnosis like this. I see it happen all the time. I'm hard pressed to put it into words at some points. And if you were a person who wanted to eat ultra low carb or, follow a Bernstein diet or something, I would have no trouble with that. But if you had the feeling you had to just keep beating you with that stick and not telling you, well, maybe there's other things you could try, I think that's torturous. And you have to show people all the options and then let them decide what to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do feel like we did start a healthier diet as a family once she was diagnosed. But if there's a birthday party at school and everyone's eating cupcakes, I want to know how to dose so she can have a cupcake. Yeah. And, we still eat moderate. Overall, we are eating healthier since her diagnosis.
So there's a bagel joint near me where sometimes my son grabs something called a killer, which I think is a bagel, eggs, bacon, pork roll, cheese. I don't know. It's I think they call it a killer because it kills your heart. But it's when they're there, he grabs strawberry milk, which I never see him drink in any other scenario. And my daughter will grab a chocolate milk, which she has 3 times a year. So, and it's not even chocolate milk. It's like Nesquik. Like I'm positive it's not milk. Like, you know what I mean? I mean, listen, if Nesquik's listening, I don't know what's in your milk. I'm sure it's milk. All right. But whatever. I'm just saying, it seems to last forever in that jar. So, there's one in our cooler and it's just been there forever. And yesterday morning, she and Arden and I were leaving for her endocrinologist appointment. She's only had 2 in person since COVID, and this was going to be the second one. It is the first one since Arden's been taking more of a singular role of taking care of her blood sugars. So I've been like purposely backing out as she's leaning in and letting it happen. And there have been times where things happen that I would change that I don't get on her about in the moment. Like I tell her about later. I'm like, hey, today I saw what happened. Here's a thing I think you could have done. Like I really am I'm a slow burn teacher as far as stuff like that goes.
I loved her episode.
Wasn't she funny? I know.
By
the way, we'll get to that. Hold on a second.
Okay.
I'll make sure to get back to it. But anyway, we're rolling out the door 45 minutes from when she's going to sit down in the office. And she's just been up and taking a shower and getting ready and everything. And she goes, I'm so thirsty. And she reaches in that cooler and pulls out that chocolate milk. And I was like, do you know how to bolus that? She's like, I don't think so. So I said, well, here's what I would do. And I told her what I would do. And we did it. And I posted her graph after the chocolate milk and on the Facebook page because it's an astonishingly good bolus. And then she got an A1C of 5.6, which is much more on her than it was on me. To me, proving that the tools I talk about on the podcast, they just sort of work. If you use them at the right times, you can get these kind of outcomes. But later I thought, who grabs a chocolate milk on their way to their endo appointment? You know what I mean? I was so proud of that. She was like, whatever, this will be fine. And she really doesn't think about it. And there's something about the stuff that we talk about here that I think lends to that ability to not go, oh, I would like to have a chocolate milk, but that's going to make my blood sugar high. And then my CGM is going to beep while I'm in there and I'm going to be embarrassed in front of them. So I'm not like none of that.
Right.
She just reached in and grabbed it. It was very cool. I was proud of her. What did you like hearing from her? Like, what did you think? You're the first person I've ever asked.
I just, I know this is a weird thing, but I just felt like it was funny to hear you interact with someone who was just like, shut up. Like, just not put you in your place, but just, it was really funny the way she was like, no one's listening to this. And, we have we put this podcast on a pedestal and then she's just like, who would listen to this? This is stupid,
You're an idiot.
I mean, she didn't say that, but it was just really funny for someone to not think of the podcast the way I feel like a lot of us listeners do.
It was interesting for me to speak to somebody who didn't have the tiniest bit of reverence. Like, not that I want that, but you're not wrong.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And it comes either way. Like, either you are really grateful for the podcast and you come on here, or I'll have somebody on from a company. And listen, the back room of that is they know this reaches a lot of people. So, if in the middle of the conversation I say something that gets a little sideways, they're not going to be like, shut up, man. They're going to be like, oh, I'm glad this is reaching people. So everybody's in that. I am in a tiny bit of a power position usually while I'm speaking.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought was funny.
Yeah.
And that she was just like, your dad.
Yeah. I did
Stop looking at me.
Then I picked the person on the planet who doesn't care about any of this at all. Yes. And I was like, can you come on the podcast? And then she was really super honest. And she was trying to be funny at times, not on purpose. Like, Arden's just like, she's got my personality to some degree. And so, she's trying to be, I could see her trying to be entertaining. And I got to be honest with you, I know that pressure. Like, there's this there's always a feeling in the back of my head, like this needs to keep moving. It needs to be entertaining. It needs to be quick.
Yes,
it needs to
of
be
course.
insightful. Like, this gets boring. People are going to stop listening. You do have that feeling. And she leaned right into it. I was super excited. We're going to record more, in the coming weeks, actually. So you're going to get more of, her and I talking about what I want
I can't wait
her to know. So we'll see how many more names I get called.
And when you said thank you, okay, so you've just maligned every sponsor of the podcast. That was amazing.
Yeah. When she was happy to tell people that for years she thought it was Omnipod, didn't know how to use her Gvoke HypoPen, even though we had extensively spoken about it many times.
Had no idea G6.
Yeah, G6. I'm like, it's a Dexcom G, and she's
Pick
like,
a number.
I'm like, there's a number after it. She just, I don't know, and I'm like, okay. But I thought, it's funny is that I'm going to tell you that a large portion of what I've seen people talking about and what's come back to me has been positive about it, and I do think that from a producing, if I put a producer's hat on for a second, I think it did what I hoped it would do, which was allow most of you to think that maybe this won't encumber, like, my child, or maybe it doesn't have to encumber me like that if you're an adult. So I was excited about that. I did get one note from somebody who did not like that Arden said she didn't believe in God. That seemed to be the only thing.
Oh, when she said that, I thought, oh no.
Yeah, that is the only thing that some people took from that. I was like, there's such a cornucopia of great information in here that you can take out of this for your life with diabetes, and instead you're focused on her religious beliefs of a 17-year-old. I was like, all right, whatever. And there was that, but even that stuff, like Arden's like, I don't care. She really isn't worried about what other people think about her. So I thought that was great.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I could use more of that. I love people that are like, when you asked, what if someone bullies you in school? And she said, that would never happen.
That would never happen. I'm taller than the boys.
Yes, I'm taller than the boys.
I was like, where does that even come from? Are they afraid of you? She's like, I don't know. Maybe. I'm like, are you sure? She's like, if they are, maybe that's good. And I was like, okay. Like, she's just very matter of fact and super common sensey too. Like, she's not, she's still 17. Like, she sometimes she said something and then contradicted herself and that kind of stuff. But she never,
she did great.
Yeah. If you would have sat and watched her, she never once measured her words. And I thought that was nice. And I'm glad when people can come on and do that. Anyway, so your daughter's diagnosed in first grade, you said?
First grade, yes.
First grade. This was surprising to you, obviously, but
yes.
it shouldn't have been.
But shouldn't have been. Yes.
Right. What's the process? You get to the hospital and you come home. What kind of like tech do they give you?
Sent home with pens and a syringe for Lantus because she needed half units. Mm-hmm. So her A1C was 7.7 at diagnosis.
Okay.
She wasn't in DKA. So the weird thing was, though, that we were released from the hospital and then the next appointment was not till 6 weeks later. And that felt so strange that we were in charge of, I'm sure every parent feels that way, or person that's diagnosed, that I'm in charge of this. I have no medical training. And it was just weird to have our first follow appointment in the clinic 6 weeks later. But then COVID struck, so all the education classes were canceled, and we went to a major children's hospital. Yes, we're in Southern California. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend whose daughter was diagnosed at 15 months old. So they were 5 years into this. And I called her and she said, ask for the Omnipod and a Dexcom, and explained what those were. So the first appointment, we were able to get the Dexcom, but by the time we actually got it, it was 3 months after diagnosis. Definitely life-changing. We love the Dexcom. It works so well for us. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Some people are like, oh, I get a sensor error. I feel like we have really good luck with almost every sensor.
I have to say that I'm going to sound like I'm defending a sponsor for a second, but I'm not. I just think it's the internet. So if, I don't know how many people are wearing Dexcoms, but just pick a big round number in your head. And if a percentage of them, even a really small percentage of them, have like a problem, or like, you're wearing a pump and you're allergic to the adhesive or something like that. And then someone comes online and says, I'm allergic to the adhesive. And if you get 10 more people to agree that that's happening to them, it feels like it's happening to everybody. Everyone. But if it was happening to everybody, they wouldn't be able to sell them. So it doesn't make it not a problem, and you don't want it to be addressed, not to be addressed. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the internet sometimes, like, I have a sensor error. Like, okay, well, okay. And they know it's not perfect. And you can hear, I've had 2 people on from Dexcom recently, and they both said we're working hard for that to be less of an issue moving forward in the next iteration at G7. And, they're not ignoring it, but this thing exists now. This is what it is. So, some people have great luck with it. Some people have middling luck, and I know a couple people it just doesn't work for. And that's, it's terrible because it is such an asset.
We started asking for about 6 months. But then they said, oh, well, you have to wait a year, and she's not on enough insulin, which she really was only using about 3 units a day and 0 Lantus at that point. She honeymooned for a long time because we caught it early.
Of course, yeah.
And so I think her pancreas was still kicking out a long time. Like, we had great nights because her body would keep her between 80 and 90 the whole night during the first 6 months, which was great. But it wasn't reality. And then they said, well, it has to be a year before you get a pump. So then we were like, okay, well, and then at a year, they were like, well, she's not using enough insulin. But the reason we actually qualified for a pump eventually is because she was diagnosed with another autoimmune condition that was going to require steroids. And so they were saying, okay, here we go. Let's get you ready for a pump. Let's get you to take the online class. And
you're about to use a lot more insulin. So
yes,
juvenile, dermatomyositis. Oh God, you said it. I got lost. Gvoke HypoPen has no visible needle and is the first pre-mixed auto-injector of glucagon for very low blood sugar in adults and kids with diabetes, ages 2 and above. Not only is Gvoke HypoPen simple to administer, but it's simple to learn more about. All you have to do is go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with insulinoma or pheochromocytoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Just a couple more things. We'll get back to Tiffany. If you're looking for a Facebook group to support you in your life with diabetes, check out Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. It's a private group that now has, I think, close to 22,000 members in it. And there is somebody in there that you are going to dig on. You know what I mean? You're going to be like, I like this guy. I like this lady. I like the way they talk about the diabetes. Or maybe you'll just watch and other people's questions will get answered, and then your questions will be answered too. Who knows what you're going to find valuable at Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. And I just want to ask you one more time, if you're a U.S. resident who has Type 1 diabetes or cares for someone with Type 1, please fill out the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. It supports people with Type 1 diabetes. When you do this, it supports the show. It's completely HIPAA compliant, absolutely anonymous. It takes less than 10 minutes. You can do it from your sofa. You could probably do it standing on your head. It takes like such a short amount of time if you're like one of those people who can stand on their head. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. There are links in the show notes of your podcast player and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to these and all the sponsors. Okay, let's get back to Tiffany and find out about that word I can't pronounce.
It took me months. Juvenile dermatomyositis.
Dermatomyositis.
So derma, skin, myo, muscle.
Okay.
So we started noticing about 9 months after she was diagnosed with Type 1 that her knuckles were getting all red. So every knuckle in her fingers and on her hands was reddening. Mm-hmm. And we had Zoom endo appointments, and we showed the endocrinologist, and we said, is this a diabetes thing? And he's like, oh, it's winter. It's probably dry skin. and kind of just brushed it off. And then that was that.
Wait, don't you live in Southern California?
Exactly.
All right, good.
our winter is like 75.
I'm paying attention. I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
And so first I thought it was Addison's disease, because when I was Googling, which I know is not good, but I was Googling, and the only thing I could come up with like autoimmune and the pigmentation was Addison. So they ran a test. He checked her thyroid and all that. Addison's came back negative. And so I was like, okay, I don't know. And then I actually posted in your Facebook group a picture of her hands. Mm-hmm. And about 90% of people said Raynaud's. And there was one person that said, how are her cuticles? How are her cuticles? And that was actually the key to it. Her cuticles were dying. Like they were all crusty. Mm-hmm. And then when I could type in the cuticles, the red knuckles autoimmune, I figured out it was juvenile dermatomyositis. But again, I was reading the extreme version, like can't stand up from the floor, which does happen, like a real severe muscle weakness, but it was so early on, she wasn't having that. And so I ended up just emailing the endocrinologist with pictures. By then she started getting a little redness under her eyes and the bridge of her nose, which is a sign of it too. And sent pictures and said, I know I'm not supposed to Google, but I think it's juvenile dermatomyositis. He referred us to the rheumatology department, and they were able to order a blood test even before we were seen by rheumatology and confirmed myositis. Yes, there's some blood tests that you can see if you have the autoantibodies, kind of like
Tiffany,
diabetes.
I don't know what it says about me, but that story is horrific, and I'm sorry for you, but all I heard was that my Facebook page diagnosed this. Is that what I just heard?
It definitely helped. I think there were 2 people that said, look into juvenile dermatomyositis.
Wow. Yeah, the power of being able to bring together like eyes. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Just a lot of eyes on something. Somebody might say something a little different. You go, oh, I never thought of that before. Is a big deal. And I don't think Googling, by the way, I mean, I know that's an old joke, but at this point, you're not trying to figure out like the big stuff. It's not the normal things. Like you're looking into something. I mean, how many people have this? Can't be.
Yeah, so it's rare.
Right.
Our rheumatologist sees, I think he said he has 50 patients with kids with juvenile dermatomyositis, but 0 with type 1. And so their initials are JDM, juvenile dermatomyositis. He has no JDM patients with type 1. And then our endocrinologist has tons of type 1s, but none with juvenile dermatomyositis.
It's so rare that, I don't know if people know this, I only know it because of the podcast, but when you Google different diseases, you normally get a breakdown of how rare it is. It pops up on the side of the Google page. This one doesn't even do that. It just like there's an article at arthritis.org that says it affects about 3,000 to 5,000 kids.
Yeah.
And that's not a lot of people. That is the
and you never want your kid to have something rare. Yeah. So what was interesting is type 1, you're giving insulin, which is like something that's naturally in your body. What's hard about juvenile dermatomyositis is you have to give all these meds that have terrible side effects. Mm-hmm. So it seems that's what seems so different about it. I mean, they're completely different. But.
What does she take for JDM?
Okay. So right now she's not on daily steroids, but for a couple months she was on daily oral prednisone, a steroid, calm the immune system. And she takes hydroxychloroquine daily, a pill. And we injections of methotrexate every week. And then once a month, she has to go in for a whole day infusion, and she gets a high dose steroid for the first 2 hours. And then she gets a thing called IVIG, which is intravenous immune globulin, which are like antibodies from donors.
What are these drugs trying to prevent or slow down?
So JDM is your immune system attacking your blood vessels. And so all these medications are trying to suppress your immune system from attacking itself. Some of them, they don't really know why they work exactly. They just say they seem to help joints. And, so that when she was diagnosed, she had an MRI of her legs, and it confirmed, I guess you can see on an MRI, myositis, like inflammation of the muscles.
Okay.
So it took a dermatologist to just visually confirm, yep, this is definitely juvenile dermatomyositis. And then MRI confirmed, yep, there's also muscles being affected. So all these things are just trying to get her body to calm down and stop attacking itself.
Are the what's the long-term goals?
Unfortunately, there's no cure, but remission is the goal. So to just be living with less side effects. So no muscle weakness, the skin rashes. I feel like we have been super lucky. I don't want to jinx it, but for some kids, this is so severe that they can't go to school because they're so weak. They can't get up and walk. They have to be on steroids for years and years, and then it makes their bones brittle, and they get fractures easily in their vertebrae. I mean, some people have such a terrible time with this disease that we've been really mild considering.
Okay. Why do you sound so together while you're telling me about it? Is it the therapy? Or are you just not?
I get that a lot. I think my childhood has helped me, like, I don't know how to say it. My childhood, I just had to like soldier on kind of thing. So I can say things without a lot of emotion, or I don't know.
You just see them as things you need to do.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
And I feel like I handle stress by just like researching more and trying to get more information. But I was such a mess when my daughter was diagnosed with type 1. And I kept telling my therapist, like, I'm not normally like this. Like, it was really hard for me to not be able to eat. And like, I couldn't eat for a month. It was just really affected me. My Erica Forsyth, is that? So that episode actually made me seek out a type 1 therapist.
Oh.
Because I started with someone else who knew nothing about type 1. And I just felt like I was wasting so much time trying to explain why it was a big deal. And then I switched to a therapist that has type 1 herself. And I love it. She wears a Slim and a Dexcom, and that's what my daughter has. And I just feel like there's that understanding of all that comes with diabetes.
Yeah, you don't have to spend all that time painting a picture of a world she's never seen before, right?
Yes.
Oh, Erica's
so
be thrilled to know
just
this.
so recommend that. And Erica was out of my network, even though her practice is about 45 minutes from us. But she was out of network, so that made me seek out. And then I found actually an in-network therapist who has type 1 herself.
Did you just call around and say, hi, you're a therapist. Do you have type 1 diabetes? And if they said no, you just hung up the phone and kept calling people? Or what did you do?
Again, I just Googled
Okay.
marriage and family therapist type 1. And it was in this lady, her name's Linda Robertson. It was in her profile. It didn't say she had type 1, but she said experienced with the challenges that come with chronic illness and type 1 diabetes.
Did you see how my old ass was just like, did you call people on the phone and hang
the phone book?
That's really something. I'm really getting to a bad spot. I'm pretty adept at using the internet, and I was still like, what do you just call and ask and hang up? Because you don't want to explain it to everybody, right? It'll take all day. You have to just go, do you have type 1 diabetes? Click that.
You won't be helpful.
I can't. Yeah,
I know anyone will be helpful, but really it was Erica's that made me like really seek out, someone that's knowledgeable with this might. So again, I thought I needed more therapy when she was diagnosed. Like I was in a good place until she was then diagnosed with the second thing.
Yeah.
And I'm reading online, monthly infusions. Some people do these infusions twice a month. And that was another blow. I feel like we were in such a good place with diabetes. And I was expecting thyroid, celiac, like that seemed so manageable.
Right. Yeah. You're like, oh, I hope I get one of these good ones. Like my thyroid doesn't work. And
I mean, nothing's good,
No,
but
I know what you mean. No, I know what you start slotting. Listen, if you all don't do this, then you're better people than I am. But there's no way not to slot things in your head. Like this is worse than that. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how you couldn't think that at some point or another. Like, oh, like we dodged one here, or, yes. And there's some people then too get a thyroid issue and then it's more difficult to manage than someone else that has it. Like, it's not to say that
it could be life and celiac changes, celiac changes like how you can eat. So I know that would be really restrictive. One thing I didn't mention was with juvenile dermatomyositis, UV exposure flares the disease. So that's actually been really hard because we live in Southern California.
Oh, the sun?
Yes.
Oh.
So like that happens with lupus. I know I listened to an episode where you had, I think it was like a professional snowboarder.
Yeah.
And he like lives in Alaska during the summer to avoid UV. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like that where something about it, UV triggers like the skin rash to be worse. And you could do months of medication and then you spend a day in the sun and it could all
just go
all your progress is undone.
Yeah.
So that's been a little hard because, we live in Southern California and it's always sunny.
Do you ever consider moving?
Possibly, but all our families here.
It's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, both of our families are here.
Well,
so
if you need a list of gloomy places, just go to the Facebook page and let people just say, I need to know where you guys live where there's no sun. I'm assuming
where there's no UV, high UV.
I think Washington State might be a spot because I was there for a week and I saw the sun like for a half a second one day. So I don't know.
And then we would also need to be near like a myositis center because not every pediatric rheumatology is really familiar with juvenile dermatomyositis. So I know like Seattle Children's is a big myositis center and places on the East Coast.
And you got to work too. Like there's.
Yes. So I work full time. My husband works full time.
Yeah.
I think that's actually why we didn't try loop because I would love to do loop, but when we started with the high dose steroids, we just thought we need something that can kind of be automated. So we went with the T-Slim. Mm-hmm. I have the most trouble so she goes to school that I teach at, which is really convenient. Mm-hmm. But there's also the navigating being a coworker with the school nurse who,
I see what you're saying. This is what you brought up at the beginning. I see. Okay. So you're a coworker, and if they do something you don't like, now you're a parent, and then that's a weird.
Yes, I don't want to be how pushy to be, and we find school orders really challenging because her prednisone, her steroid tapers every 5 days. So every 5 days, the amount of steroid she's getting changes, which changes her insulin needs. Mm-hmm. I can say that when we go for our infusion days, her average is she uses about 10 units insulin a day. And the days she gets the high steroids intravenously uses 40 units.
It's a big jump.
Yes.
Wow.
But that's really hard to then go back to school the next day. And then the school orders are for a non-steroid day, but they have to follow the school orders.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You don't have that provision in your 504 that says, unless the parent says differently. That's a very important sentence.
So we're working. I even asked when I called for the school orders and explained, and they said, no, it can't just say, what the pump profile on, because I was hoping the school orders could just say whatever the profile says. I have an IV day. I have an after IV day. We can make
that would make
profiles.
Sense. Who's arguing with you about that? Your doctor?
The nurses, when you call in to the endo.
Yeah. You need that. That's not okay. That's obvious. You need to get above that line of defense at the doctor's office. You need to get to a decision maker. A decision maker is what you need. And then you explain that again.
So we were hoping Control IQ can just kick in some insulin because they're very rigid about no corrections before 3 hours.
Mm.
And I just hate seeing her high, but they're like, oh, we can't give a correction until 3 hours. So Control IQ can give a little automated bolus.
Yeah.
So that's been helpful.
That they won't know about.
Well, I mean, the pump does it, so it's okay. It's
Yeah.
automated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Isn't that funny? So you can't do it, but the pump can do it. I got
Yes.
you. Yeah. So nobody wants to take any responsibility for anything.
Well, they just have to follow the school orders, it's so hard but I will say I've been so lucky. The school I work at, my daughter gets out before I'm done teaching because I teach upper grade and she's lower grade. They hired an extra LVN to stay so that she can go to the daycare on campus while I'm still teaching. Like, I will say they have been great about supporting us.
Mm-hmm. What? Wait, I'm so confused. I'm not confused. I don't want to get you in trouble at work. Why? You're there. What does it matter? Like, you're there. You're the lady who 3 hours later is going to do it yourself.
Well, sometimes I do if it's recess or something, I can walk over, but it's really hard. I mean, I don't get many breaks teaching. I'm in a self-contained class, so I have recess and lunch break where I could walk over and bolus her, and I have. During virtual learning, when I had no students, I did one time, it was Valentine's Day, have to run across campus and give her a shot because she was double arrow up and they weren't allowed to correct.
So yes. No kidding. How far are you like walking from your daughter at school?
No, just like a 3-minute walk.
I would just tell the kid, take the long way to the nurse's office. Stop by here. Right back into your room. No one's going to, I get you fired in 3 seconds, Tiffany. No problem.
Well, next year she's going to be in 4th grade. There's only 2 4th grades. So I'll put her in my partner's room, which is next door to my room. So next year I'm hoping to have a different setup where she can maybe more manage and I can just literally open the classroom door and peek in on her.
I wonder if that wouldn't make the nurse feel more comfortable too.
Yes.
Like getting to see it happen. Okay. It should work out. I mean, listen, you got bigger fish to fry. Who cares? Like, really, all this, I almost cursed. All this happened to you in the last 2 years?
Yeah, 1.5 years.
Wow. Oh, geez. No kidding. Oh, wow. I'm sorry. That's a big, COVID. You were probably I don't know what all these people are talking about, this thing. At least I'm at home.
Right. Yeah. I feel like we were very lucky with the timing that life slowed down.
You're not the only person that's ever said that to me.
Yes.
For real.
We had more time from the rush of,
all this
but
new
my
information.
husband's great.
How is he with this, by the way? How do you manage type 1? Is it the both of you together, or do one of you take more control?
I think I probably take more control because I'm obsessed with listening to the podcast and learning. Mm-hmm. He's still very good at it. He's just as good as I am. But sometimes he defaults to me how many carbs should we give for this? Yeah. Or, what should we do for this? And just the fact that I'm a teacher, and so I work teacher hours, so I'm around her more. I'm the one that drives them to school and picks them up from school. We live in LA, so of course, he sits in traffic to his job. But no, we definitely are a good team. I feel like all these challenges have brought us closer.
Okay, good.
In the last year and a half. Because it's we're the only ones that know what we're going through.
Yeah, you're definitely on the same side of a fight now. I've said this before, and I stick by it. When my wife is angry at somebody that's not me, it's better for our relationship. You can just be like, yeah, them, boo. As long as she's not mad at me, I'm like, this is terrific. But no, having a common target. Target's the wrong word. Focus. Having a common focus is good. It does make you feel like you're on the same team,
Yes.
So there's a little marriage hack for all of you. If your spouse is mad at you, find another person they could be mad at.
We have a friend who has a type 1. She's going into 2nd grade. I've been watching them a little bit every week. And so I've been getting the experience of dosing and caring for another type 1 that's not my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say it's given me so much more empathy for school nurses, because I try to, really, so they're very low carb and keep tight control. And so when the daughter's at my house and she's, 71 diagonal down, I'll give her, some sips of juice. And in my kid, I would know and trust that it's going to kick in. But in her, if I see her then go to the 50s, I'm like, drink more. And I hate when the nurses do that to my daughter. But I now see how scary it is when you don't know someone else's body, the way you know your own kid. And it really has given me more patience for what nurses have to do.
Okay.
Because I don't know how this little girl responds. And and she's like, I don't feel good. And I'm like, okay, drink the whole juice box.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it's my daughter, I can be a little more risky and just trust that it's going to kick in. I just don't want anything happening on my watch with someone else's child.
Isn't that something? Look at you. Yeah, that's great insight too. Like it really is. I have that knowledge from helping people remotely where you're just like, I don't really know what's going to happen. And I'm not even there. So if they miss a sign that I would see if I was there. So but there's a fine line between careful and not going to be effective too. And so it really is, it's interesting that you saw that way. That's a great insight, and it definitely will help you.
Yes, it really makes me less annoyed, thinking, we gave her half a juice box, but she kept going down and she said she was low. Normally I'm like, oh no, don't give the whole juice box. And then now I see like, what? Sometimes it's a little tricky with someone else's kid to trust.
Yeah, to how
when
to
they're
do it.
Feeling well.
So you can see it happen a number of times. You really get a feeling for how this is going to go. Yeah, it takes time to figure out, but you're still very early at it, and you really are. The steroids are an added. That's tough in the beginning, right? It's almost like she was diagnosed with a super version of like getting her period all at the same time, like that impact from those steroids. And that insulin,
it's crazy.
Yeah. You're talking about going from 10 to 40 in a day,
and 40 units, not even having great numbers that day.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's keeping her in the hundreds and even 200s. Like I'm putting it in and it's just having no effect on her. And then until suddenly I have 13 units on board and then she goes double arrow down.
Yeah. No,
it's just
a big leap.
It's crazy.
How were you able to do that? Do you just, the idea of you got to meet the need? You can't argue with this. This is what's happening. And this is what you need to do.
Really. So the first time we were still on MDI, she had to kick off treatment for JDM by doing a 3-day hospital stay of high dose steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And we were MDI. She was on zero Lantus at the time because still honeymooning. And I had to do injections for those 3 days while she was getting high dose steroids. And the hospital wants to be in charge of the shots.
Yeah.
And I quickly learned about an hour in that I was going to just have to give tons of secret shots. Because I tried to be, definitely a rule follower. And so when they said, okay, don't let her eat lunch, we will they have to have 2 nurses come in to approve and give the insulin, so they can double check.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like an hour later and we were still waiting to feed her. And I was just like, no, we can't. No. And so I just gave secret shots the entire 3 days. And I would let them do breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Mm-hmm. And then you just fixed what they screwed up.
They didn't even screw it up. It just wasn't enough. I was giving her 5 units at a time and she was going up. That was the first time she ever got to 400.
Mm-hmm.
And no amount of insulin was bringing it down. And then I made her take a warm bath. And that's actually the only thing that actually turned the line. Yeah.
No kidding. Wow.
So
you've really been forced to figure things out very quickly.
But the podcast has definitely helped because I just kept saying more insulin instead of trying to understand like, well, why? Why does steroids do this? What's happening in her body?
You hear my dumb voice in your head.
More
going,
insulin.
More
insulin.
Doesn't matter. Go, go, go. I feel good about that. I'm happy that this show helped you a little bit. Really.
Yeah. Don't sit there and figure out, why do steroids do this? What is it about steroids? Just more insulin, more insulin.
Just knowing that it's going to. Have you found any rhyme or reason to it now? Have you been able to figure out days versus like when it titrates away, like our first day is more impactful? Do you have it kind of down to a little bit of a science, or does it jump around and you have to be flexible every day of it?
Definitely flexible every day, but in her pump, I have an IV profile for the days we go in. And then I have a day after IV profile because she's still insulin resistant that day, but not as much as the day before. Mm-hmm. And then the third day we go back to her normal profile, but I find doing a lot more corrections.
Okay. And that's holding up and happening like that time after time.
Yeah, it's crazy that it kind of always works out to 40 units. Like without me calculating, I'm not purposely counting as I go, but then at the end of the day, when you look in the pump history, it's like 39, 40, 41 units every one of those IV days.
Boy, that's very interesting.
Yeah. And then non-IV days, she's like 10 units a day.
So then it's a timing issue because the amount you've got down to a science of about 40, but there's days it doesn't work out as well. We're timing, but how do you time I guess that's a lot to think about. Really? Yeah. I'm sorry.
But the good thing about when you go in for the IVs, you just go to the infusion center and they don't worry about the diabetes at all. They totally leave it up to you, which is really helpful.
Yeah. Well, they probably are like, look, there's only so much we can do here. You need to understand some of this. That's good too, because it puts you in, I mean, you feel like you're in charge, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you have a good feeling about it. I would like that. I would think that would make me nervous if she was going to do something already impactful, and then on top of that, the diabetes was just taken away from me by people who I'm pretty sure wouldn't be as good at it as I would be. I'd feel upset about that. Okay.
Yes.
Tiffany, I have to ask you, is there anything that we haven't spoken about that you wish we would have?
The only last thing is that I'm going into my 11th year of teaching, and I never had a type 1 in my class until this past year. And of course, it's like the virtual year where the kids were only back in class for about 3 months at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And so I had my first type 1 student, and it was interesting because I always thought I would follow her on my phone, like, oh, if she was ever in my class, I put her phone. But actually, it really worked out having her phone. The health office has an iPad that follows her numbers.
Okay.
But what worked out for us was putting her cell phone, she wears a Dexcom, putting her cell phone just in the back of the room. And as I'm teaching and, when I walk back there, just pushing the phone to wake it up and seeing her number. And it surprisingly was actually better than like having alarms go off for my daughter and her on my phone. I felt like, and she was also very stable. So that helped. I mean, if she was constantly dropping, then that wouldn't.
Was she newer diagnosed?
No, I think she's like 3 years in, or 2 or 3 years in.
So you're you're being able to see ahead of time, like looking to see where trends were going. You found really helpful.
Yes. And just, being able to push it like, okay, she's 150 stable. She's good. And she was also very aware of herself. Like if she ever was low, she was very responsible and capable of saying, I need juice, and her mom would text me. And so it was like I had the skills, and I'm so sad it was the virtual year because I finally had the skill set to have her in my class.
I'm ready for this, damn it. And now,
yes.
Well,
I only had her for like 3 months in class.
Yeah. Did it teach you anything? Like, were there any takeaways from it that you think you'll use for your daughter moving forward?
Having the cell phone available instead of in the spy belt, having her put the phone out where the teacher can just push on it and see her number is really helpful.
Do you think that only worked though because your kid has diabetes and you know what you were looking at?
Probably.
So how do we?
But I could probably make a really quick cheat sheet that's not too intense, that says to the teacher, if she's in the, this range, sugar, or, half a juice box.
Yeah, do this.
But like I said, the office is following their numbers on an iPad, and that was new. So I pushed that, and they got an iPad this year because they've never followed kids' numbers.
Mm-hmm. No,
so I thought that was a big step.
Yeah, that's a really great step, especially in those. I know in California, the school systems are huge too, so it's harder to get things accomplished, I would imagine.
I think I'm in like a not somewhat smaller district, but it's a unified district that has about 10,000 students.
Okay. All right.
I did teach for LAUSD, so that was a ginormous school district.
It's almost like its own country, right?
Yes.
That you're running. Well, I really appreciate you doing this. I hope, are you not still nervous? I hope.
No, I feel good now.
You feel good.
But I think I was like entertaining enough.
You didn't think you were entertaining enough?
No.
Oh. Well, did you think I was entertaining?
Yes. I'm entertained by every episode, so I need to remember that.
I'm terrific, so you're not a good judge because you feel like that. Wait, are there episodes where you're like, Scott's terrible, but the episode is good?
I think there was. I think there was only one where I just couldn't. Stopped it.
Was it me or was it the guest? Be honest.
It was you.
Yeah, I was bad.
I think you were just talking about the podcast a lot.
I just went off on like some tangent about something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you guys got.
But no, I really love the podcast.
I'm not unaware, by the way, if that happens. It's just like you have to understand that I need therapy sometime too. If you need this, there are 1,000 things happening behind the scenes where you might. I guess the easy way for you to think about it would be that the podcast is under attack from multiple flanks and I'm defending it. And once in a while, I have to scream out loud somewhere where someone can hear me. So I appreciate that you didn't want to hear it, but trust me, I had to get it out or I would have been in trouble.
I've listened to hundreds of episodes.
Yeah.
So, and I go all out of order.
I have to be honest with you. If you only turned off one of them, I'm taking that as a major win. Even if you were like, this guy's
absolutely
like, oh, please. Are you kidding me? I love it. Listen, the truth is everyone can't love everything. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. Please go take that survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. And don't forget the Facebook page, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. There's something for everyone here at the Juicebox Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode. Wow, that was a very deep thanks so much for listening.